The blood hadn't dried yet on the concrete floor when Sofia Martinez stepped over the body of Miguel El Sombra Varga, the cartel's most feared assassin. Her small hands, still steady despite everything, tucked the smoking Glock back into her shoulder holster. The warehouse around her held the kind of silence that only comes after violence, thick and heavy like the humid Mexico City air that drifted through the broken skylights above. She was 23 years old and looked 17. Her round cheeks and wide brown eyes had earned her nothing but mockery from every law enforcement agency she'd ever worked with. But Miguel Varga would never laugh at anyone again. Before we jump back to see how Sofia Martinez became the agent who could take down Mexico's most dangerous assassin, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The police sirens were still 15 minutes out. She had counted the response time during her 3 weeks of surveillance, noting how the local cops always took their time when calls came from this part of the industrial district. Too many bribes, too many threats, too many reasons to drive slowly when the cartels were involved. Sofia pulled out her phone and photographed the scene from 3 different angles. The flash illuminated the graffiti-covered walls and scattered cocaine packages that had spilled from torn duffel bags during the fight. Miguel lay face down beside an overturned metal table, a neat hole through the back of his skull. Professional. Clean. Final. Her radio crackled to life. Agent Rodriguez's voice came through scratchy and urgent. "Phoenix, what's your status? We heard shots." She pressed the transmit button. "Target neutralized. Scene secure. Send the cleanup crew." "Copy that. Good work, Martinez. Good work." As if taking down the man who had murdered 47 people across 3 countries was just another day at the office. As if she hadn't spent the last 6 months tracking him through the maze of cartel hierarchies and safe houses that stretched from Tijuana to Guatemala City. As if the scar on her left shoulder, still pink and tender from their first encounter in Juarez, didn't throb every time it rained. She walked to the warehouse's loading dock and lit a cigarette, her hands finally beginning to shake now that the adrenaline was wearing off. The Mexico City skyline stretched out before her, a sprawling collection of concrete and neon that seemed to pulse with its own dangerous rhythm. Somewhere out there, Miguel's boss was probably already planning her death. The cartels didn't forgive, they didn't forget, and they certainly didn't appreciate federal agents who disrupted their operations. But Sofia had never much cared what other people appreciated. The first police car arrived 12 minutes later, exactly 3 minutes earlier than her calculations had predicted. The 2 officers who climbed out looked young and nervous, their hands resting on their holstered weapons as they approached the warehouse. Sofia badged them and watched their expressions change from suspicion to confusion to something that might have been respect. "Dios mío," the younger cop whispered when he saw Miguel's body. "You killed El Sombra?" "He killed himself," Sofia replied, crushing her cigarette under her boot. "I just helped him along." 3 months earlier, Sofia had sat in the back corner of the DEA field office briefing room while her supervisor, Assistant Director James Morrison, clicked through surveillance photos on the overhead projector. The faces that appeared on screen were hard and scarred, men who had earned their reputations through decades of violence. Miguel Varga's photo came up last, and the room fell silent. 47 confirmed kills, Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much death in his 20-year career. Multiple torture sessions. 3 mass executions. He's the Valdez cartel's primary enforcer, and he's currently operating somewhere in central Mexico. Sofia raised her hand. Every head in the room turned toward her, and she felt the familiar weight of their skeptical stares. At 5'3", with her hair pulled back in a ponytail and her baby face scrubbed clean of makeup, she looked more like someone's kid sister than a federal agent. "Martinez," Morrison acknowledged with a barely concealed sigh. "Sir, I've been tracking Varga's movement patterns for the past 8 months. I have reason to believe he's operating out of a series of safe houses in the doctor's neighborhood. I've identified 3 potential locations, and Agent Thompson, a 20-year veteran with graying temples and a permanent scowl, cut her off with a dismissive wave. Kid, Miguel Varga eats agents like you for breakfast. This isn't some street dealer we're talking about. This is a professional killer." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Sofia felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her voice steady. "With respect, sir, I've spent more time studying his patterns than anyone else in this room. I know his habits, his contacts, his preferred routes. I know he has a girlfriend in Roma Norte who he visits every Tuesday. I know he gets his hair cut at the same barbershop every 2 weeks. I know he—" "You know jack shit," Thompson interrupted, his voice rising. "You've been on the job for what, 2 years? Varga has been killing people since before you graduated high school." More laughter. Sofia's jaw tightened, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had learned long ago that anger only made people take her less seriously. Morrison cleared his throat. "Martinez, I appreciate your enthusiasm. But Agent Thompson is right. Varga is out of your league. We're putting together a task force of experienced agents to handle this operation. I'd like to request assignment to that task force, sir." The room erupted in outright laughter this time. Agent Williams, a muscular man with sleeve tattoos who looked more like a bouncer than a federal agent, wiped tears from his eyes. "Oh, that's rich. Babyface wants to play with the big boys." "She probably thinks she can charm him to death," Thompson added, which brought another wave of laughter. Sofia stood up slowly, her hands clenched at her sides. Every person in that room was looking at her like she was a child, playing dress-up in her father's clothes. She had seen that look her entire career, from her instructors at Quantico to her field training officers to her fellow agents. It never got easier. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" she asked Morrison. He nodded, though she could see the wariness in his eyes. "I graduated second in my class at the academy. I have a 97% accuracy rating at the range, which is higher than anyone else in this room. I speak fluent Spanish and Portuguese. I've successfully completed 14 undercover operations without my cover being blown. And I've been studying Miguel Varga for 8 months while the rest of you were busy with whatever else you were doing. But none of that matters, does it? Because I look young." The laughter had stopped. The room was quiet now, the kind of uncomfortable quiet that follows when someone says something true that no one wants to hear. "Martinez," Morrison began, but she cut him off. "I'm not asking to be the lead agent, sir. I'm asking to be part of the team. I have information that could be valuable to this operation." Thompson leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "And what information would that be, exactly?" Sofia reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. She had spent weeks compiling the contents, cross-referencing surveillance reports with financial records, tracking cell phone data, analyzing traffic camera footage. It was the most comprehensive intelligence package on Miguel Varga that anyone had ever assembled. "I know where he's going to be next Thursday at 3 p.m., she said simply. The room went dead silent. Morrison gestured for her to continue. Sofia opened the folder and pulled out a series of photographs, spreading them across the conference table. They showed a middle-aged woman with bleached blonde hair entering and leaving various locations around Mexico City. "This is Carmen Ruiz, Varga's girlfriend. She works as a secretary at a dental office in Roma Norte, but she's also laundering money for the cartel through a series of shell companies. Every Thursday afternoon, she makes a cash deposit at Banco Azteca on Avenida Insurgentes. Varga always provides security for these transfers personally because the amounts are too large to trust to subordinates." She pulled out another photograph, this one showing Miguel Varga himself getting out of a black SUV outside the bank. His face was partially obscured by sunglasses, but his distinctive scar running from his left ear to his jaw was clearly visible. "This photo was taken last Thursday. I've been conducting surveillance for 6 weeks, and he's never missed a Thursday appointment. The pattern is consistent." Thompson leaned forward to examine the photographs more closely. His skeptical expression was slowly being replaced by something that might have been professional respect. "How did you get these photos without being detected?" he asked. "I rented an apartment across the street from the bank. 4th floor, corner unit. Perfect sightlines, minimal foot traffic. I've been posing as an art student working on a photography project about urban architecture." Morrison picked up one of the surveillance photos and studied it carefully. "These are good quality. Professional level. I spent 2 years as a crime scene photographer before joining the DEA," Sofia explained. "I know how to use a camera." Agent Rodriguez, who had been quiet throughout the briefing, spoke up for the first time. "What's the security situation around these transfers?" Sofia pulled out a detailed floor plan of the bank and the surrounding area. Varga typically arrives with 2 bodyguards in separate vehicles. They establish a perimeter while he escorts Carmen inside. The transfer takes approximately 15 minutes. He always exits through the main entrance and drives north on Insurgentes toward the industrial district. She pointed to various markings on the floor plan. There are 4 potential escape routes, 3 choke points where we could establish overwatch, and 2 natural positions for sniper coverage if needed. The room was completely quiet now. Even Thompson was studying her materials with obvious interest. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sofia could see the wheels turning in their heads as they processed the quality and depth of her intelligence gathering. Morrison closed the folder and looked directly at her. "This is impressive work, Martinez. Very impressive. But Varga isn't just some money launderer we can arrest on banking charges. He's a killer. When he realizes we're onto him, he's going to respond with violence. I understand that, sir." "Do you?" "Because understanding it intellectually and dealing with it in the field are 2 different things. When someone starts shooting at you, when you're looking down the barrel of an AK-47 held by a man who's killed more people than you've had birthdays, your babyface isn't going to help you." There it was again. Babyface. The term that had followed her through every assignment, every evaluation, every moment of her career when she had tried to be taken seriously. Sofia felt the familiar anger rising in her chest, but she pushed it down. Anger wouldn't help her here. Only competence would. "Sir, with respect, my appearance has actually been an asset in undercover operations. People underestimate me. They don't see me as a threat. That gives me an advantage." Thompson snorted. "An advantage against street dealers and low-level smugglers, maybe. But Varga isn't going to underestimate anyone. He survived this long by being paranoid and ruthless. Which is exactly why he won't expect a young female agent to be tracking him," Sofia countered. "His profile suggests he's most comfortable dealing with male authority figures. He's never worked with women in positions of power within the cartel structure. He won't know how to read me." She pulled out another document from her folder, this one, a psychological profile she had compiled from interviews with former cartel members who had encountered Varga. "I've identified several behavioral patterns that suggest he has difficulty adapting to unexpected situations. He's methodical, almost ritualistic in his approach to operations. When his routine is disrupted, he makes mistakes." Morrison was nodding slowly. "And you think your presence would disrupt his routine?" "I think my presence would confuse him long enough for more experienced agents to take him down," Sofia replied carefully. She was walking a fine line here, trying to show confidence without appearing arrogant. Agent Williams, who had been quietly reviewing her surveillance photos, looked up. "These shots were taken from some pretty dangerous positions. How did you manage to get so close without backup?" "I didn't get close, sir. I got invisible." She pulled out a series of photos showing herself in various disguises around the neighborhood where Varga operated. In one, she was dressed as a street vendor selling newspapers. In another, she wore the uniform of a cleaning lady entering an office building. In a third, she sat at a cafe reading a textbook, looking like any other college student grabbing coffee between classes. "The key is to become part of the background," she explained. "People see what they expect to see. A young woman with books is a student. A young woman with a mop is a cleaner. A young woman with newspapers is trying to make a few pesos. Nobody looks twice." Quote, Thompson was studying the disguise photos with grudging admiration. "This is actually pretty sophisticated fieldcraft." "Thank you, sir." Morrison tapped his pen against the conference table, clearly wrestling with the decision. The room waited in tense silence while he reviewed Sofia's materials one more time. "Martinez," he finally said, "I'm going to give you a chance, but you're not going to be a primary agent on this operation. You'll be part of the surveillance team, providing intelligence and backup only. If shooting starts, you stay back and let the experienced agents handle it." Sofia's heart leaped, but she kept her expression neutral. "Understood, sir. And if you screw this up, if you get yourself or anyone else hurt because you bit off more than you can chew, I'll make sure you spend the rest of your career processing paperwork in Des Moines. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." Thompson leaned forward in his chair. "One more thing, kid. Miguel Varga has killed federal agents before. 3 of them, to be exact. He cut their heads off and sent them to their families in cardboard boxes." This isn't a game. Sofia met his gaze steadily. I never thought it was, sir. The task force meeting broke up 30 minutes later, with assignments distributed and operational plans beginning to take shape. Sofia gathered her materials and headed for the door, but Morrison called her name before she could leave. Martinez. A word. She turned back, wondering if he was going to change his mind about including her in the operation. That intelligence package you put together, he said once the room had cleared. How long did it take you? About 3 months of active surveillance, sir, plus another 2 months of preliminary research. And you did all of this on your own time? Yes, sir. Nights and weekends, mostly. Morrison shook his head. Most agents wouldn't have put in that kind of effort without being specifically assigned to the case. Why did you? Sofia considered her answer carefully. She could tell him about the nights she couldn't sleep, thinking about Varga's victims. She could mention the crime scene photos she had studied until she had memorized every detail, every wound, every sign of the torture he had inflicted. She could talk about her need to prove herself in a profession that seemed determined to keep her on the sidelines. Instead, she gave him the simple truth. Because someone needs to stop him, sir. And I realized I might be the only person who could figure out how. Morrison nodded slowly. Just remember what Thompson said. Varga is dangerous in ways you can't imagine. Don't let your confidence turn into overconfidence. I won't, sir. But as Sofia left the briefing room and walked through the corridors of the DEA field office, she felt a familiar determination settling in her chest. Every person she passed looked at her the same way they always had, like a child playing at being an adult. Let them look, she thought. Let them underestimate her. Miguel Varga certainly would. She spent the rest of that day reviewing her surveillance notes and updating her intelligence files. Her cubicle was tucked away in a corner of the main office, surrounded by filing cabinets and separated from the other agents by gray fabric dividers. There wasn't much, but it was hers, and she had turned it into a command center for her private war against the Valdez cartel. The walls were covered with maps of Mexico City, marked with colored pins indicating known cartel safe houses, money laundering operations, and drug distribution points. A bulletin board held photographs of key cartel members, their faces connected by red string in a web that showed relationships and hierarchies. At the center of it all was Miguel Varga's picture, larger than the others, with a note written in Sofia's neat handwriting. Target acquired. Agent Rodriguez stopped by her desk around 6 p.m., when most of the office had emptied out for the day. He was one of the few agents who had never made jokes about her appearance, treating her with the same professional courtesy he showed everyone else. Working late again, Martinez? Just updating my files, she replied without looking up from her computer screen. Rodriguez pulled up a chair and sat down beside her desk. Can I ask you something? Sofia saved her work and turned to face him. Sure. Why is this case so important to you? I mean, beyond the obvious reasons. She was quiet for a moment, considering how much to tell him. Rodriguez was a good agent and a decent person, but she had learned to be careful about revealing too much of herself to her colleagues. My first case as a federal agent was a mass grave in Sonora, she finally said. 12 bodies, all torture victims. The local police said it was probably drug dealers killing each other. Case closed. But I spent some time looking into it, and I found connections to other murders across 3 states. Same methods, same signature mutilations, same killer. She pulled out a file folder from her desk drawer and opened it to reveal crime scene photos. Even Rodriguez, who had seen plenty of violence in his career, grimaced at the images. Miguel Varga, she continued. These were some of his early victims, before he became the cartel's primary enforcer. But nobody wanted to investigate, because it meant admitting that a single killer was operating across multiple jurisdictions. Too much paperwork, too much coordination required. So the cases stayed cold. Rodriguez studied the photographs with professional interest. You connected all of these to Varga? Took me about 6 months of cross-referencing autopsy reports and witness statements. The pattern was there, but nobody wanted to see it. Sofia closed the folder and put it back in her drawer. That's when I realized that if I wanted Miguel Varga caught, I was going to have to do it myself. And you've been working this case ever since? Every spare moment for the past 2 years. Rodriguez whistled softly. That's dedication, Martinez. Some might say obsession. Sofia shrugged. 47 people are dead because of this man. If being obsessed is what it takes to stop him from killing more, then I'll wear that label proudly. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Rodriguez stood up and put his hand on Sofia's shoulder. For what it's worth, I think Morrison made the right call, including you in this operation. You know more about Varga than anyone else in the department. Thanks, Rodriguez. That means a lot. Just promise me you'll be careful out there. Thompson was right about one thing. Varga is dangerous in ways most of us can't imagine. Sofia nodded. I promise. But as Rodriguez walked away and she turned back to her computer screen, Sofia wasn't thinking about being careful. She was thinking about Thursday afternoon, about the bank on Avenida Insurgentes, about the moment when Miguel Varga would finally be within her reach. She had been underestimated her entire career. People looked at her baby face and her small stature and assumed she was weak, naive, unprepared for the realities of law enforcement. They were wrong, but she had stopped trying to convince them otherwise. Instead, she had learned to use their assumptions against them. Miguel Varga would look at her and see what everyone else saw, a young woman who didn't belong in his world of violence and death. He would dismiss her as harmless, just another bureaucrat playing at being a cop. That would be his last mistake. Sofia worked until almost midnight, refining her operational plan and double-checking every detail. She had mapped out 17 different scenarios for Thursday's operation, accounting for variables ranging from traffic patterns to weather conditions. She had studied the architectural plans of the bank building until she could navigate it blindfolded. She had memorized the backgrounds and psychological profiles of every cartel member who might be present. When she finally left the office, the Mexico City streets were quiet, except for the occasional taxi and the distant sound of music from late-night cantinas. Sofia lived in a small apartment in Condesa, a neighborhood that was slowly being gentrified by young professionals and American expatriates. It was safe, clean, and anonymous. Everything she needed. Her apartment was as organized as her office, with maps and files covering every available surface. She had turned her spare bedroom into a miniature command center, complete with surveillance equipment and communication gear. The walls were lined with bookshelves containing everything from tactical manuals to psychological studies on criminal behavior. Sofia made herself a cup of coffee and sat down at her desk to review her notes one more time. Tomorrow, she would begin the most important week of her career. Everything she had worked toward for the past 2 years was leading to Thursday afternoon and her confrontation with Miguel Varga. She opened her laptop and pulled up the surveillance video she had recorded of Varga's last visit to the bank. The footage was grainy, shot from her apartment window across the street, but it clearly showed his routine. He always arrived exactly at 3 p.m., always parked in the same spot, always spent exactly 15 minutes inside the building. Sofia watched the video 3 more times, studying every gesture, every movement, every detail of Varga's behavior. She was looking for weaknesses, for patterns she could exploit, for anything that might give her an advantage in the confrontation she knew was coming. Because despite what she had told Morrison and the others, Sofia had no intention of staying in the background during Thursday's operation. She had spent too long tracking Miguel Varga, learned too much about his methods and his madness, to let someone else take him down. This was her case, her investigation, her target. And when the shooting started, she would be ready. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of oppressive heat that made Mexico City feel like a concrete oven. Sofia Martinez stood in front of her bathroom mirror at 5:30 a.m., applying the final touches to her disguise. The reflection staring back at her was that of Maria Santos, a 20-year-old sociology student at Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. Brown contact lenses covered her natural green eyes, and carefully applied makeup had made her already young face look even more innocent and naive. She pulled her long black hair into a loose ponytail and slipped on a pair of wire-rimmed glasses that didn't contain prescription lenses. The backpack slung over her shoulder held textbooks, notebooks, and pens that would complete the illusion of a college student spending her afternoon studying at a cafe. Hidden beneath the false bottom were her service weapon, extra ammunition, zip tie restraints, and a tactical radio tuned to the DEA task force frequency. Sofia had spent the previous 3 days rehearsing every aspect of her cover identity. She could discuss Mexican sociological theory with enough detail to fool casual conversation. She had memorized the campus layout, student enrollment statistics, and even the names of several professors in case anyone asked specific questions. The character of Maria Santos was as thoroughly constructed as any undercover operation she had ever undertaken. But this wasn't officially an undercover operation. According to the task force briefing yesterday, Sofia would be positioned 3 blocks away from the bank, monitoring radio communications and providing backup intelligence. She was specifically ordered to maintain her distance and avoid direct contact with Miguel Varga or any of his associates. She had nodded and agreed to those orders, just as she had agreed to every restriction and limitation that had been placed on her throughout her career. But agreeing and complying were 2 different things. Sofia left her apartment at 6 a.m. and took a circuitous route through the city, changing metro lines twice and doubling back on her path to ensure she wasn't being followed. The habits of surveillance detection had become second nature to her during her months of tracking cartel operations. Even when she wasn't officially working undercover, she moved through the world like someone who understood that danger could come from any direction. The cafe she had chosen was located directly across the street from Banco Azteca, with large windows that provided an unobstructed view of the main entrance. Sofia had been coming here regularly for the past 6 weeks, establishing herself as a familiar presence that the staff would remember but not question. She always ordered the same thing, sat at the same table, and spent hours reading textbooks while occasionally glancing up at the street. Today would be different, but the staff wouldn't realize that until it was too late. Sofia ordered her usual café con leche and positioned herself at a regular table by the window. She opened a sociology textbook to a random chapter about urban crime patterns and began to read, though her attention was focused entirely on the street outside. At 7:45, the first surveillance team arrived. Agent Thompson pulled up in an unmarked sedan and parked half a block north of the bank. Sofia could see him adjusting his rearview mirror to maintain visual contact with the target location. 15 minutes later, Agent Williams positioned himself in a doorway across the street, disguised as a homeless man reading a newspaper. The surveillance net was taking shape exactly as planned during yesterday's briefing. At 8:30, Sofia's radio crackled softly through the earpiece hidden beneath her hair. Morrison's voice came through clear and professional. "All units, this is command. Radio check, over." One by one, the task force members checked in. Thompson from his vehicle position. Williams from his doorway. Rodriguez from a rooftop across the street. Agent Chen from inside the bank, posing as a customer. Each voice was calm and controlled, the sound of experienced professionals preparing for a high-stakes operation. When Morrison called for Phoenix, Sofia's radio call sign, she hesitated for just a moment before responding. Phoenix in position and ready, over. She wasn't lying exactly. She was in position, and she was certainly ready. The fact that her position was significantly closer to the target than her supervisors believed was a detail she chose not to clarify. The morning passed slowly. Sofia nursed her coffee and periodically turned pages in her textbook, maintaining the appearance of a diligent student while conducting continuous surveillance of the street. She noted the arrival of each task force member, the positioning of backup vehicles, and the gradual establishment of a perimeter around the bank. At 11:15, she spotted the first cartel reconnaissance. A young man on a motorcycle made 3 passes down Avenida Insurgentes, slowing slightly each time he approached the bank. His movements were too deliberate to be coincidental, and Sofia made a mental note of his appearance and license plate number. Miguel Vargas' security team was conducting their own surveillance, checking for anything unusual in the area. Sofia keyed her radio twice, the prearranged signal for suspicious activity observed. Thompson's voice came back immediately. "Phoenix, report. Motorcycle reconnaissance, dark blue Yamaha, license plate ending in 742. 3 passes, southbound on Insurgentes. Rider appears to be conducting counter-surveillance. Copy that. All units be advised. Possible hostile reconnaissance in progress." The fact that Vargas' people were checking the area was actually encouraging. It meant they were proceeding with their regular security protocol, which suggested they hadn't detected the task force presence. Sofia watched the motorcycle disappear into traffic and made another notation in her mental log. At 12:30, Carmen Ruiz arrived at the bank. Sofia recognized her immediately from weeks of surveillance photos, though the woman looked nervous in a way she hadn't during previous visits. She kept glancing over her shoulder as she walked from her car to the bank entrance, and her usual confident stride had been replaced by quick, uncertain steps. Sofia frowned and keyed her radio again. "Command, this is Phoenix. Primary subject has arrived early and appears agitated. Something may have spooked her." Morrison's response was immediate. "All units maintain position. Do not, repeat, do not approach the target area until Varga arrives." But Carmen's early arrival and obvious nervousness were red flags that couldn't be ignored. Sofia had studied this woman's patterns for months, and this behavior was completely outside her normal routine. Either something had gone wrong with the cartel's internal security, or they had detected the task force surveillance. Sofia closed her textbook and stood up, leaving exact change on the table for her coffee. She slung her backpack over her shoulder and walked toward the cafe's bathroom, which was located in the back of the building and provided access to a rear exit. If she moved quickly, she could position herself closer to the bank and get a better read on the situation. Her radio crackled as she reached the bathroom door. "Phoenix, report your status." Sofia turned off her radio and slipped it into her backpack. She had learned long ago that it was easier to ask forgiveness than permission, and right now her instincts were telling her that something was wrong. Carmen Ruiz's behavior suggested that the afternoon's operation might not go according to plan. Sofia exited through the cafe's rear door and found herself in a narrow alley that ran parallel to Avenida Insurgentes. She had scouted this route during her weeks of preparation, identifying it as a potential approach vector if she ever needed to get closer to the bank without being observed by either cartel surveillance or her own task force. She moved quickly but carefully through the alley, avoiding broken glass and puddles of water from a recent rainstorm. Her lightweight canvas shoes made virtually no sound on the pavement, and her student disguise would appear unremarkable to anyone who might see her from a distance. The alley connected to a small plaza behind the bank building, where several food vendors had set up their carts to serve the lunchtime crowd. Sofia bought a taco from one of the vendors and positioned herself near a concrete planter, where she could observe the bank's rear entrance while appearing to be just another customer, enjoying her meal. At 1:15, a black Suburban with tinted windows pulled into the alley and parked near the bank's service entrance. Sofia recognized it immediately as Miguel Varga's primary transportation, though it was nearly 2 hours early for his usual arrival time. Two men got out of the vehicle and took positions near the rear door, their hands resting inside their jackets in the universal gesture of armed bodyguards. Sofia's pulse quickened. Varga was changing his routine, arriving early and using an entrance that her task force hadn't anticipated. The afternoon's operation was already deviating from their carefully planned scenario, and none of the other agents knew it yet. She reached for her radio, then remembered that she had turned it off to avoid awkward questions about her current location. She was faced with a choice: reveal her unauthorized position to warn the task force, or try to handle the developing situation on her own. At 1:22, Miguel Varga himself emerged from the Suburban. Sofia had seen hundreds of photographs of him, had studied surveillance video until she could recognize his walk from 3 blocks away, but this was the first time she had observed him in person. He was smaller than she had expected, barely 5'8", with a compact build that suggested both strength and speed. His dark hair was slicked back with gel, and he wore an expensive-looking gray suit that probably cost more than Sofia made in a month. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch in her throat. Even from 30 meters away, she could see the cold intelligence in his gaze as he surveyed the area around the bank. These were the eyes of a predator, someone who had killed dozens of people and felt nothing resembling remorse. Miguel Varga looked at the world like a hunter studying potential prey. He spoke briefly to his bodyguards, gesturing toward different positions around the building. Sofia could see him dividing his security team, sending men to cover approaches that the task force hadn't anticipated. Whatever had made Carmen nervous had also put Varga on high alert. Sofia turned her radio back on, knowing that she would have to explain her position, but recognizing that the task force needed this intelligence immediately. "Command, this is Phoenix. Priority traffic." Morrison's voice came back sharp with concern. "Phoenix, where are you? We've been trying to reach you." "I'm positioned behind the target location. Varga has arrived early and is using the rear entrance. He has at least 4 bodyguards and appears to be implementing enhanced security measures." There was a long pause before Morrison responded, and Sofia could practically hear him calculating the implications of her unauthorized movement. "Phoenix, you are ordered to withdraw immediately and return to your assigned position." "Sir, I'm in the best position to provide real-time intelligence on Varga's current location and activities. I recommend maintaining my current observation post. Martinez, I don't care what you recommend. You were specifically ordered to maintain distance from the target area. Withdraw immediately." Sofia watched Miguel Varga disappear through the bank's rear entrance, followed by 2 of his bodyguards. The other 2 remained outside, positioning themselves to watch both the alley and the plaza where Sofia was located. "Sir, withdrawing now would require me to move through the line of sight of hostile surveillance. I recommend maintaining position until the target exits the building." Another pause, longer this time. Sofia could imagine Morrison's frustration as he realized that her tactical assessment was correct. Moving her now would risk exposing the entire operation. "Fine. Maintain your current position, but do not, under any circumstances, attempt to engage the target. You are there for observation only." "Understood, sir." But even as Sofia acknowledged the order, she was already calculating angles and distances. Miguel Varga was less than 50 meters away, separated from her by a bank building and 2 bodyguards. After 2 years of tracking him, after months of studying his patterns and planning for this moment, he was finally within her reach. The question was whether she would have the discipline to let someone else take him down, or whether she would seize the opportunity she had worked so hard to create. At 1:35, Carmen Ruiz emerged from the bank's front entrance, moving quickly toward her car. Sofia could see her through the gaps between buildings, and the woman's body language suggested barely controlled panic. Whatever transaction she had conducted inside the bank, it hadn't gone according to plan. Sofia keyed her radio. "Command, primary subject is departing via front entrance. She appears distressed." "Copy that. All units prepare for target's exit." But Miguel Varga didn't emerge from the rear entrance as expected. Minutes passed, and Sofia began to wonder if he had left through a different route, or if something had gone wrong inside the bank. She repositioned herself slightly, moving to a location with a better view of the building's rear entrance. At 1:42, she heard the first gunshot. It came from inside the bank, muffled by the building's walls, but unmistakably, the sound of a high-caliber weapon being discharged. Sofia's training kicked in immediately, and she found herself moving toward the sound before her conscious mind had fully processed what was happening. The radio exploded with chatter as the task force reacted to the gunfire. Morrison's voice cut through the confusion, calm and professional, despite the chaos. "All units, shots fired at target location. Move to secondary positions and prepare for armed response." A second gunshot echoed from inside the bank, followed by screaming. Sofia could see people running from the front entrance, civilians fleeing what had apparently become an active shooting situation. Through the bank's rear windows, she caught glimpses of movement and the muzzle flash of additional weapons being fired. Sofia reached the bank's rear entrance just as one of Varga's bodyguards burst through the door, his face covered in blood and his shirt torn. He looked around wildly, spotted Sofia approaching, and reached for his weapon. Everything slowed down in the way it always did during moments of extreme violence. Sofia could see the man's hand moving toward his shoulder holster, could track the trajectory of his draw, could calculate the precise moment when his weapon would clear leather and become a threat to her life. She had her own gun out and aimed before his fingers touched his grip. "Federal agent! Drop your weapon!" The bodyguard's eyes widened as he realized he was facing an armed opponent rather than a fleeing civilian. His hand froze halfway to his gun, and Sofia could see him calculating his chances of completing the draw before she fired. "Drop it now, or I will shoot you!" He must have realized that his odds weren't good, because his hand moved slowly away from his weapon and into the air. Sofia approached him carefully, keeping her gun trained on his center mass while using her peripheral vision to scan for additional threats. "Face down on the ground, hands behind your head." The man complied, lowering himself to the pavement with the careful movements of someone who understood that any sudden gesture might result in his immediate death. Sofia zip-tied his hands behind his back with professional efficiency, then keyed her radio with her free hand. "Command, this is Phoenix. I have one hostile in custody at the rear entrance. Multiple shots fired inside the building. Unknown number of additional hostiles still inside." Morrison's response came back immediate and furious. "Phoenix, you were ordered to maintain observation only. Do not engage the target." "Sir, I have a civilian hostage situation in progress. I'm the closest agent to the rear entrance." Before Morrison could respond, another gunshot echoed from inside the bank, followed by a woman's scream. Sofia's jaw tightened as she recognized the voice. Carmen Ruiz was still inside the building, and from the sound of things, she was in serious trouble. Sofia looked down at the restrained bodyguard and made a decision that would define the rest of her career. She could wait for backup, follow protocol, and let the experienced agents handle the situation. That was what she had been ordered to do, what everyone expected from someone with her appearance and experience level. Or she could do what she had been trained to do, what every instinct in her body was telling her to do. Sofia stepped over the bodyguard and moved toward the bank's rear entrance. "Phoenix, report your status immediately." She turned off her radio again and slipped it into her backpack. Some conversations were better had after the shooting stopped. The rear entrance led directly into the bank's employee break room, a small space with vending machines, tables, and motivational posters encouraging staff productivity. Sofia could hear voices coming from the main banking floor, though she couldn't make out specific words through the intervening walls. She moved through the break room and found herself facing a hallway that connected to the bank's main operations area. The voices were clearer now, and she could distinguish at least 3 different speakers. Miguel Vargas' voice was unmistakable, speaking in rapid Spanish with the kind of controlled fury that suggested someone was about to die. Sofia crept down the hallway until she reached a doorway that provided a view of the main banking floor. What she saw made her blood run cold. 3 bank employees were lying face down near the teller windows, their hands zip-tied behind their backs. Carmen Ruiz was kneeling in the center of the floor with her hands raised above her head, tears streaming down her face as Miguel Vargas paced around her in tight circles. A 4th man, presumably Vargas' remaining bodyguard, stood near the front entrance with an assault rifle trained on the hostages. "You stupid bitch," Vargas was saying in Spanish, his voice filled with cold rage. "You led them right to us. Miguel, please, I didn't know they were watching me. I swear on my mother's grave I had no idea." Vargas stopped pacing and crouched down beside Carmen, his face inches from hers. "Then explain to me how federal agents knew exactly when and where we would be today. Explain to me how they managed to set up surveillance positions around this building." Sofia's stomach lurched as she realized what had happened. Somehow, Miguel Vargas had detected the task force surveillance. Whether through his own counterintelligence efforts or through corruption in the local police department, he had learned about the operation and decided to turn the tables on his pursuers. The hostages weren't just collateral damage, they were bait, designed to draw the task force into a confrontation on Vargas' terms. "I'm telling you the truth, Miguel. I don't know how they found us." Vargas stood up and pulled a chrome-plated pistol from his jacket. "Then you're of no use to me anymore." He pressed the barrel against the back of Carmen's head, and Sofia knew she had perhaps 5 seconds before he pulled the trigger. 5 seconds to decide whether to maintain her cover and let an innocent woman die, or to reveal her position and engage a professional killer in a gunfight she might not survive. Sofia stepped into the doorway with her weapon raised and aimed directly at Miguel Vargas' center mass. "DEA, drop your weapon!" Vargas spun toward her voice, his pistol swinging away from Carmen's head, and Sofia got her first close look at the man who had haunted her dreams for the past 2 years. He was younger than she had expected, maybe 35, with the kind of lean, predatory build that suggested both speed and endurance. But it was his eyes that confirmed everything she had learned about his psychological profile. They held no fear, no surprise, no emotion whatsoever. These were the eyes of someone who killed without hesitation and slept without nightmares. "Well, well," Vargas said in accented English, a cold smile spreading across his face. "What have we here? A little girl playing federal agent?" His bodyguard had turned towards Sofia as well, But his assault rifle was pointed toward the floor and would take precious seconds to bring to bear. Sofia kept her weapon trained on Varga while using her peripheral vision to track the second threat. "Drop your weapon and get on the ground. Now!" Varga chuckled, a sound that held no warmth whatsoever. "Do you know who I am, little girl?" Miguel Varga, also known as El Sombra, wanted for 47 murders across 3 countries. "And you're under arrest." The smile on Varga's face widened. 47? My. Someone has been doing their homework. But I think your count is a little low. He was stalling, Sofia realized, buying time for his bodyguard to position himself for a shot. She had perhaps 10 seconds before the tactical situation shifted decisively in their favor. "Last warning. Drop your weapon." "Or what? You'll shoot me?" Varga shook his head in apparent amusement. "You look like you should be in high school, not playing cop. How old are you, 16? 17. Sofia felt the familiar anger rising in her chest, the same fury that had driven her through every moment of humiliation and dismissal in her career. But this time, instead of pushing the anger down, she let it fuel her focus. "I'm old enough to put a bullet through your heart if you don't drop that gun in the next 3 seconds. Varga's eyes flickered, and Sofia saw something that might have been uncertainty cross his face. He had expected her to be intimidated by his reputation, to hesitate long enough for his bodyguard to gain tactical advantage. Her calm professionalism was apparently not what he had anticipated. 1, Sofia counted. Varga's hand tightened on his pistol, but he didn't lower it. 2. The bodyguard began to raise his assault rifle, moving with the kind of practiced efficiency that spoke of extensive combat experience. Sofia tracked his movement while keeping her primary focus on Varga. 3. Miguel Varga made his choice. Instead of dropping his weapon, he dove to his left while simultaneously raising his pistol toward Sofia's position. It was a move that might have worked against a less experienced opponent, someone who would hesitate or flinch at the moment of truth. Sofia Martinez had been preparing for this moment for 2 years, and she didn't hesitate. Her first shot caught Varga in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his pistol skittering across the bank floor. Her second shot, fired less than half a second later, took the bodyguard in the chest, just as he brought his assault rifle to bear on her position. Both men went down hard, their weapons clattering away across the polished marble floor. Sofia kept her gun raised and ready as she advanced into the banking area, scanning for additional threats while moving to secure the weapons. Carmen Ruiz was sobbing hysterically, her hands still raised above her head, despite the fact that the immediate danger had passed. The bank employees remained motionless on the floor, too terrified to move without being told it was safe. Sofia kicked Varga's pistol away from his position and knelt beside him to check his pulse. He was still alive, though bleeding heavily from the shoulder wound. His eyes were open and filled with a mixture of pain and disbelief. "You shot me," he said in English, his voice weak but still carrying traces of his earlier arrogance. "I warned you to drop your weapon," Sofia replied, applying pressure to his wound to prevent him from bleeding out before medical assistance arrived. "You're just a child. A little girl with a baby face." Sofia looked directly into his eyes, and for the first time in the conversation she smiled. "That's Agent Babyface to you." The front door of the bank exploded inward as the rest of the task force finally breached the building. Morrison led the charge, followed by Thompson, Williams, and Rodriguez, all of them with weapons drawn and ready for a firefight. They stopped dead when they saw Sofia kneeling beside Miguel Varga's wounded form, her service weapon still in her hand, and 2 neutralized threats on the floor around her. Morrison lowered his weapon and stared at her in a mixture of amazement and exasperation. "Martinez, what the hell did you do?" Sofia stood up slowly, holstering her weapon with professional composure, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. "I arrested Miguel Varga, sir." "Just like we planned." The ambulance sirens had faded into the distance 20 minutes ago, carrying Miguel Varga to Hospital General under heavy guard. Sofia Martinez sat on the hood of an unmarked DEA vehicle, watching crime scene technicians photograph blood spatters and collect shell casings from inside the bank. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, though she could still feel the phantom recoil of her service weapon every time she flexed her fingers. Agent Morrison approached with 2 steaming cups of coffee from a nearby vendor, his expression unreadable in the harsh afternoon sunlight. He handed one to Sofia and leaned against the vehicle beside her, both of them watching the controlled chaos of a federal crime scene in full swing. "The doctors say Varga will live," Morrison said without preamble. "Shoulder wound clean through. He'll be in surgery for a few hours, but he's stable enough to be arraigned once he recovers." Sofia nodded, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. "What about his bodyguard?" "Critical, but stable. Your shot collapsed his lung, but he's expected to make a full recovery. He'll be charged as an accessory to kidnapping and assault with a deadly weapon." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the organized efficiency of evidence collection. Sofia had been through post-incident debriefings before, but never as the primary shooter in a federal operation. She knew that every aspect of her actions would be scrutinized, analyzed, and questioned by people who hadn't been in the bank when the shooting started. "You know there's going to be an investigation," Morrison said eventually. "Internal Affairs will want to review your decision to disobey direct orders and engage the suspects without backup." "I understand, sir. They'll question whether you had justification to use deadly force. They'll want to know why you turned off your radio and moved to an unauthorized position." Sofia turned to look at Morrison directly. "Are you asking me to justify my actions, sir?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on the bank entrance where Carmen Ruiz was giving her statement to Agent Rodriguez. The woman had stopped crying, but her face still held the hollow expression of someone who had stared death in the face and barely survived. "Martinez, in my 20 years with the DEA, I've seen agents freeze up when the shooting starts. I've seen experienced veterans hesitate at the moment when hesitation means innocent people die. What I witnessed in that bank today..." He paused and shook his head. "I've never seen anything like it from someone with your level of field experience." "Thank you, sir." "That wasn't necessarily a compliment. What you did was reckless. You violated direct orders, endangered yourself, and potentially compromised the entire operation. By every measure of proper procedure, you should be facing suspension and possible termination." Sofia felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her expression neutral. She had known this moment would come, had understood the potential consequences of her actions even as she made them. "But," Morrison continued, 3 bank employees went home to their families tonight because you were in that building. Carmen Ruiz is alive because you ignored orders and followed your instincts. And Miguel Varga, one of the most dangerous men in Mexico, is in federal custody instead of planning his next massacre." He turned to face her fully, and Sofia was surprised to see something that might have been admiration in his eyes. "The investigation will happen, and you'll have to answer for your decisions. But I want you to know that when they ask for my assessment of your actions, I'm going to tell them that you did exactly what a federal agent is supposed to do. You protected innocent lives and took a killer off the streets." Sofia felt a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying begin to lift from her shoulders. "Does that mean I'll stay on the task force?" Morrison smiled for the first time since the shooting. "Agent Martinez, after today, I think we need to discuss your next assignment. Because tracking down cartel enforcers might not be challenging enough for someone with your particular skill set." The internal affairs investigation took 3 weeks and involved more paperwork than Sofia had seen in her entire career. She was interviewed by federal prosecutors, DEA supervisors, and independent review boards. Every decision she had made in the bank was dissected and analyzed, from her initial approach to her final shots. The investigators were particularly interested in her psychological state during the confrontation. Had she been angry, scared, operating on emotion rather than training? Sofia answered their questions with the same calm professionalism she had shown during the shooting itself, explaining her tactical reasoning and threat assessment in clinical detail. The final report concluded that Agent Sofia Martinez had acted within the scope of her authority and training, using appropriate force to neutralize an imminent threat to civilian lives. Her decision to disobey orders was noted in her personnel file, but it was accompanied by a commendation for exceptional bravery in the line of duty. Miguel Varga was indicted on 49 counts of murder, kidnapping, drug trafficking, and weapons violations. The prosecution had enough evidence to seek the death penalty, though political considerations made extradition to the United States uncertain. For now, he would remain in a maximum security Mexican prison, while diplomats and lawyers argued over jurisdiction. Sofia visited him once, 3 days after his arraignment. She had told herself she was going to gather intelligence about other cartel operations. But if she was honest, she was curious to see how imprisonment had affected the man who had terrorized Mexico for years. Varga looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, though his eyes still held their predatory intelligence. He was seated across from her in a sterile interview room, his wounded shoulder immobilized in a sling and his hands cuffed to a metal table. "The famous Agent Babyface," he said when Sofia entered the room. "I wondered if you would come to gloat." "I'm not here to gloat, Miguel. I'm here to ask you about your operations in Guadalajara." Varga laughed, a sound that still carried traces of the coldness she remembered from the bank. "You think I'm going to help you now? After you shot me and destroyed my life? I think you're smart enough to realize that cooperation might be your only chance of avoiding execution. And I think you're naive enough to believe that justice actually exists in this world." Varga leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same calculating gaze she remembered. "Tell me something, Agent Martinez. How does it feel to be famous?" Sofia frowned. "I don't know what you mean." "The newspapers are calling you the agent who brought down El Sombra. Your picture is on television, in magazines. Everyone wants to know about the young woman who accomplished what experienced agents couldn't." Sofia had been avoiding media coverage of the arrest, focusing instead on her paperwork and preparing for her next assignment. She hadn't realized that the story had attracted significant public attention. "I was just doing my job." "Were you?" "Because from where I was lying on that bank floor, it looked like you were proving a point. Like you had something to prove to all those people who doubted you." Sofia stood up abruptly, recognizing the game Varga was trying to play. He was attempting to get inside her head, to make her question her own motivations and second-guess her actions. "This interview is over." "You know I'm right," Varga called after her as she walked toward the door. "You didn't shoot me to save those hostages. You shot me because you needed to prove that the little girl with the baby face could do what the big strong men couldn't." Sofia paused at the door but didn't turn around. "Miguel, the reason I shot you is simple. You were pointing a gun at innocent people, and I had the training and authority to stop you. Everything else is just noise." She left the prison without looking back, but Varga's words stayed with her during the drive back to Mexico City. Had she been trying to prove something in that bank? Had her decision to engage been motivated by professional duty or personal ambition? The questions bothered her more than she wanted to admit. 2 weeks later, Sofia was called to Assistant Director Morrison's office for what she assumed would be a routine follow-up meeting about the Varga case. Instead, she found herself facing a panel of senior DEA officials she had never met before. Morrison gestured for her to take a seat at the conference table. "Agent Martinez, I'd like you to meet Deputy Administrators Sarah Chen from Washington and Regional Director Carlos Mendez from our El Paso office." Sofia shook hands with both officials, noting the kind of expensive suits and perfectly styled hair that suggested they spent more time in boardrooms than in the field. "Agent Martinez," Chen began, "we've been reviewing your file and the circumstances surrounding Miguel Varga's arrest. Your actions have attracted considerable attention within the agency and in the media." "Yes, ma'am. We're prepared to offer you a significant promotion and transfer to our Washington headquarters. You would be working directly with the administrator's office on high-profile international cases." Sofia blinked in surprise. A transfer to Washington was the kind of career advancement that most agents worked decades to achieve. It would mean higher pay, better benefits, and the kind of visibility that could lead to senior leadership positions within the agency. "That's very generous, ma'am. May I ask why?" Director Mendez leaned forward in his chair. "Agent Martinez, what you accomplished with the Varga case was extraordinary. You demonstrated tactical skills and decision-making ability that are rare at any level of law enforcement. The agency needs agents like you in positions where you can have maximum impact. And frankly, Chen added, your story has captured public imagination in a way that could be very beneficial for the DEA's public relations efforts. A young female agent taking down one of Mexico's most dangerous criminals sends a powerful message about the agency's capabilities and commitment to diversity. Sofia felt a familiar anger beginning to build in her chest. Once again, her appearance and gender were being treated as her most important qualifications rather than her actual skills and experience. With respect, ma'am, I didn't arrest Miguel Varga for public relations purposes. I did it because he was a criminal who needed to be stopped. Of course, Chen replied smoothly, but we have to consider all aspects of an agent's value to the organization. Your technical skills are impressive, but your symbolic value is equally important. My symbolic value? Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair, apparently recognizing the dangerous direction the conversation was taking. Agent Martinez, he interjected, what Deputy Administrator Chen is saying is that you could serve as an inspiration to other young women considering careers in law enforcement. Your success story could help recruit the next generation of federal agents. Sofia looked around the table at the three officials, all of whom were watching her with the kind of expectant expressions that suggested they thought she should be grateful for this opportunity. Instead, she felt the same frustration she had experienced throughout her career, when people focused on what she represented rather than what she could accomplish. I appreciate the offer, she said carefully, but I'd like to remain in Mexico City for now. I feel like I can do the most good working cartel cases in the field. Chen's smile became noticeably cooler. Agent Martinez, this is the kind of opportunity that doesn't come along often. A promotion to headquarters, direct access to senior leadership, the chance to influence policy at the highest levels. I would encourage you to consider it very carefully. I have considered it, ma'am, and I respectfully decline. The room fell silent. Sofia could see surprise and disappointment on the faces around her, as if they couldn't understand why anyone would turn down such an obvious career advancement. Is there something specific about the position that concerns you? Mendez asked. Sofia took a deep breath, knowing that her next words might define the rest of her career. Sir, I became a federal agent because I wanted to catch criminals and protect innocent people. I didn't become an agent to be a symbol or a recruitment poster. If the agency needs someone to give speeches and pose for photographs, there are probably better candidates than me. Chen's expression had turned distinctly frosty. Agent Martinez, I think you may be misunderstanding the nature of leadership in federal law enforcement. Senior agents have responsibilities that go beyond field work. I understand that, ma'am, but I'm not ready for those responsibilities yet. I still have work to do in the field. Morrison cleared his throat. Perhaps Agent Martinez could take some time to consider the offer? That won't be necessary, sir. My answer is no. After the meeting ended and the Washington officials had left, Morrison asked Sofia to remain behind. He closed the door and sat back down across from her, his expression unreadable. Martinez, do you realize what you just did? I turned down a promotion I didn't want, sir. You turned down a promotion that could have set you up for the rest of your career. Deputy Administrator Chen doesn't make offers like that lightly, and she definitely doesn't appreciate having them rejected. Sofia shrugged. Then maybe she shouldn't have made it about my appearance and gender instead of my qualifications. Morrison leaned back in his chair and studied her for a long moment. You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just another young agent, trying to prove something. But I'm starting to realize that you're not trying to prove anything. You already know who you are. I'm a federal agent, sir. Nothing more. Nothing less. And that's exactly why you're going to have a long and successful career, regardless of whether you ever make it to Washington. Morrison smiled and stood up. Your next assignment is tracking a weapons smuggling operation that's been moving military-grade firearms from Texas to cartel groups in Sonora. Interested? Sofia felt a familiar excitement building in her chest. Another case. Another chance to do the work that had drawn her to law enforcement in the first place. Very interested, sir. Good, because after what you did with Miguel Varga, I have a feeling the cartels are going to be a lot more careful about underestimating agents who look like they should be in college. As Sofia left Morrison's office and walked through the DEA field station, she noticed that other agents were looking at her differently than they had before. The dismissive glances and condescending smiles had been replaced by something that looked like professional respect. Agent Thompson actually nodded to her as she passed his desk, and Agent Williams looked up from his paperwork to say, "Good work on the Varga case, Martinez." Sofia realized that she had finally achieved what she had been working toward her entire career. She was no longer seen as the agent with the baby face who looked too young for the job. She was simply Agent Martinez, a federal law enforcement officer who got results. The phone on her desk was ringing when she reached her cubicle. She answered it to find a reporter from a major news magazine asking for an interview about her role in the Varga arrest. "I'm sorry," Sofia said politely, "but I don't give interviews about ongoing cases." "But Agent Martinez, our readers would love to hear from the young woman who took down Mexico's most dangerous assassin. You could inspire countless young women to consider careers in law enforcement." Sofia looked at the photos of Miguel Varga that still covered her bulletin board. Then, at the new case files Morrison had left on her desk. Somewhere in those files was another criminal who needed to be caught. Another operation that needed to be disrupted. Another chance to do the work that mattered. "I appreciate the interest," she told the reporter, "but I have criminals to catch. That's what they pay me for." She hung up the phone and opened the first file, immediately becoming absorbed in the details of weapons, serial numbers, and shipping manifests. In a few hours, she would begin the patient work of building another case, tracking another target, proving once again that justice didn't depend on how old you looked or whether people took you seriously. It only depended on whether you were willing to do the work. 6 months after the Miguel Varga arrest, Sofia Martinez found herself crouched behind a shipping container in the port of Veracruz, watching through binoculars as armed men unloaded wooden crates from a cargo vessel that had arrived from Houston 3 hours earlier. The salt air carried the sounds of machinery and shouting dock workers, providing perfect cover for the surveillance operation she had been conducting for the past week. The weapons smuggling case had led her from the border towns of Texas, through a network of corrupt officials and cartel intermediaries, finally culminating in this moment when she could observe the actual transfer of military-grade firearms to Mexican criminal organizations. The crates being unloaded contained enough assault rifles and ammunition to supply a small army, all of it destined for the streets of Mexico's most violent cities. Sofia keyed her radio with a whispered transmission. "Control. This is Falcon. I have visual confirmation on the target vessel. Estimate 40 to 50 wooden crates being transferred to ground transportation." Agent Rodriguez's voice came back through her earpiece. "Copy that, Falcon. Maintain surveillance and report when transfer is complete." The operation had been planned with the kind of meticulous detail that Sofia had become known for since the Varga case. She had spent months tracking the smuggling network, identifying key players, mapping their communication patterns, and predicting their operational schedules. Her reputation within the DEA had grown considerably, and she now found herself leading investigations rather than being relegated to support roles. But tonight felt different. The men moving around the cargo vessel carried themselves with a military precision that suggested professional training rather than typical cartel muscle. Their equipment was newer and more sophisticated than anything she had observed in previous operations. Most concerning of all, she had spotted at least 3 individuals who appeared to be conducting counter-surveillance, scanning the surrounding area with night vision equipment. Sofia adjusted her position behind the shipping container and focused her binoculars on the group's apparent leader, a tall man with graying hair who wore an expensive suit despite the industrial setting. She had never seen him before, but his body language suggested someone accustomed to command authority. He gestured to his subordinates with the casual confidence of someone who expected immediate obedience. As she watched, the man pulled out a satellite phone and made a brief call. Even from her distance, Sofia could see the tension in his posture as he listened to whoever was on the other end of the line. When he ended the call, he immediately began issuing orders that caused his men to move with increased urgency. Something was wrong. The transfer was happening too quickly, with too much organization and too many security precautions. This wasn't the kind of operation that mid-level cartel smugglers typically conducted. Sofia reached for her radio again, but before she could transmit, a hand clamped down over her mouth and an arm wrapped around her throat from behind. She tried to struggle, but her attacker was significantly larger and stronger than she was. A voice whispered in accented English directly into her ear. Do not move, Agent Martinez. Do not make a sound. Sofia's blood turned to ice as she recognized the voice. It belonged to Carlos Mendoza, Miguel Vargas' former lieutenant, and the new operational commander of the Valdez cartel. Intelligence reports suggested he had assumed control of the organization's enforcement operations after Vargas' arrest, but he was supposed to be operating out of Guadalajara, not Veracruz. You have been watching us for quite some time, Mendoza continued in his soft, cultured voice. We have been watching you as well. Sofia forced herself to remain calm, despite the terror coursing through her system. Mendoza's reputation was almost as fearsome as Vargas had been, though he was known for psychological torture rather than simple brutality. He was also considerably more intelligent than his predecessor, with a background in military intelligence that made him particularly dangerous to law enforcement operations. Your colleagues believe you are conducting routine surveillance, Mendoza said. They do not know that you have discovered something much more significant than a simple weapons transfer. He slowly removed his hand from her mouth, though his arm remained across her throat in a position that could easily cut off her air supply if she attempted to call for help. What do you want? Sofia asked quietly. I want to offer you a choice, Agent Martinez. A choice that will determine whether you live through the next hour. Mendoza guided her away from the shipping container and toward a black sedan that was parked in the shadows between two warehouse buildings. Sofia could see at least 3 other men positioned around the vehicle, all of them armed, and watching for any sign of approaching law enforcement. The operation you have been investigating is not what you believe it to be, Mendoza continued as they walked. Those weapons are not being distributed to street dealers or local cartel cells. They are being prepared for something much more ambitious. Sofia's mind raced as she tried to process this information. If the weapons weren't being distributed through normal cartel channels, what was their ultimate destination? In 3 days, those rifles will be used to attack a federal courthouse in Mexico City, Mendoza said, answering her unspoken question. The target is Judge Elena Vasquez, who has been presiding over cartel prosecution cases. The attack will be designed to look like the work of a rival criminal organization, but it will actually be carried out by mercenaries hired by certain elements within the Mexican government. Sofia felt her stomach lurch as the implications of Mendoza's words sank in. A government-sponsored assassination disguised as cartel violence would not only eliminate a troublesome judge, but also provide justification for increased military intervention in cartel territories. Why are you telling me this? Mendoza stopped walking and turned to face her directly. In the dim light from the port's security lamps, she could see that his eyes held the same cold intelligence she remembered from Miguel Vargas, but tempered with something that might have been pragmatism. Because Miguel Vargas was a psychopath who enjoyed killing for its own sake. I am a businessman who understands that excessive violence is bad for profit margins. Judge Vasquez's death will trigger a federal response that will disrupt our operations for months. So you want me to stop the assassination? I want you to arrest the mercenaries and expose the government officials who hired them. In exchange, I will provide you with detailed intelligence about their operation, including names, locations, and timing. Sofia stared at him in disbelief. You want me to work with the cartel? I want you to prevent a massacre that will ultimately harm both our organizations, Mendoza replied. Your DEA colleagues will see it as a major victory against government corruption. My associates will benefit from continued judicial stability. Everyone wins except the corrupt officials who deserve to be exposed. Sofia's training screamed at her to reject any proposal that involved cooperating with cartel leadership. But if Mendoza was telling the truth about the planned assassination, dozens of innocent people could die in the courthouse attack. Judge Vasquez had 3 young children and had been one of the few Mexican officials willing to stand up to cartel intimidation. How do I know you're not lying? Mendoza reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Photographs, financial records, communication intercepts, personnel files. Everything you need to verify what I have told you and build a case against the real conspirators. Sofia took the envelope with trembling hands, noting its substantial weight. If the contents were authentic, they represented the kind of intelligence breakthrough that could expose corruption at the highest levels of Mexican government. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Judge Vasquez continues to preside over cartel cases in a predictable and professional manner. The mercenary team that was hired to kill her is eliminated, removing a potential threat to our own security. And corrupt government officials who might someday turn against us are neutralized. Sofia realized that Mendoza's proposal made perfect sense from a criminal perspective. He wasn't trying to help law enforcement out of any moral conviction. He was simply protecting his organization's long-term interests by eliminating threats and competitors. "I need time to consider this." "You have until tomorrow night," Mendoza replied. "After that, the mercenary team will move to their final staging area, and your opportunity to stop them will be lost." He gestured to one of his men, who immediately moved towards Sofia's position. For a moment, she thought they were going to kill her despite Mendoza's offer of cooperation. Instead, the man handed her a secure cell phone. "Speed dial 1 will reach me directly," Mendoza explained. "When you have made your decision, call that number. If you choose to cooperate, I will provide you with the mercenaries' exact location and operational timeline. If you choose to pursue this through normal channels, Judge Vasquez will be dead within 72 hours. Sofia slipped the phone into her jacket pocket, her mind already racing through the implications of what she had learned. If she reported Mendoza's contact to her supervisors, they would launch a massive investigation that might or might not prevent the assassination. If she accepted his offer of cooperation, she would be crossing ethical lines that could end her career and possibly her life. "There is one more thing you should consider, Agent Martinez," Mendoza said as his men began moving back toward their vehicle. "Miguel Varga was captured because he underestimated you. I will not make the same mistake. If you betray our arrangement or attempt to use this information to target my organization, the consequences will be severe." "Is that a threat?" Mendoza smiled, and Sofia was chilled by how much warmth the expression contained. Unlike Varga's cold psychopathy, Mendoza's danger came from his ability to appear reasonable and trustworthy, even while planning violence. "It is simply a statement of fact. You have proven yourself to be a formidable opponent, Agent Martinez. I would prefer to have you as a temporary ally rather than a permanent enemy." The cartel leader and his men disappeared into the darkness as silently as they had appeared, leaving Sofia alone beside the shipping container with a cell phone, an envelope full of intelligence, and a decision that would define the rest of her career. Sofia returned to her surveillance position and watched the completion of the weapons transfer, but her mind was no longer focused on collecting evidence for the smuggling case. Instead, she found herself analyzing every aspect of Mendoza's proposal, weighing the potential benefits against the obvious risks. If the intelligence in the envelope was accurate, she could prevent an assassination and expose government corruption at the highest levels. But accepting information from cartel sources would violate every principle of law enforcement ethics and potentially compromise any prosecutions that resulted. On the other hand, if she ignored Mendoza's warning and Judge Vasquez was killed, Sofia would have to live with the knowledge that she could have prevented the murder. When the cargo vessel finished unloading and the trucking convoy departed the port, Sofia made her way back to the DEA safe house where the rest of her team was waiting. Agent Rodriguez looked up from his laptop as she entered the command center. "How did the surveillance go? Did you get good footage of the transfer?" "Affirmative," Sofia replied, though her thoughts were elsewhere. "The weapons are definitely being moved through the port. I counted at least 50 crates." Rodriguez nodded and made notes in his operational log. "We'll coordinate with Mexican customs to intercept the convoy tomorrow morning. This should be enough evidence to roll up the entire smuggling network." Sofia sat down at a computer terminal and opened the envelope that Mendoza had given her. The contents were even more comprehensive than she had expected. Photographs showed meetings between government officials and the mercenary team leader. Financial records documented payments from Mexican intelligence accounts to offshore companies controlled by the mercenaries. Communication intercepts revealed detailed planning for the courthouse attack, including floor plans and security assessments. If the documents were authentic, they provided irrefutable evidence of a government conspiracy to assassinate a federal judge. But their source made them inadmissible in any legitimate court proceeding. Sofia closed the envelope and stared at the secure phone Mendoza had given her. In less than 24 hours, she would have to make a choice that would either save Judge Vasquez's life or preserve her own professional integrity. She couldn't do both. Agent Rodriguez noticed her distraction and walked over to her workstation. "Everything all right, Martinez? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sofia forced herself to smile. "Just tired. It's been a long week." Tell me about it. But we're close to wrapping this case up. After tomorrow's arrests, you'll be able to take some well-deserved leave time. Sofia nodded absently, knowing that regardless of her decision about Mendoza's proposal, the next few days would be anything but restful. If she chose to cooperate with the cartel leader, she would be embarking on the most dangerous and ethically complicated operation of her career. If she chose to ignore his warning, she might be condemning an innocent woman to death. As Rodriguez returned to his laptop and the rest of the team continued their operational planning, Sofia sat alone with her thoughts and the weight of an impossible choice. For the first time since joining the DEA, she found herself questioning whether doing the right thing and following proper procedure were the same thing. The secure phone felt heavy in her pocket, a constant reminder that some decisions couldn't be made by consulting policy manuals or seeking supervisory approval. Sometimes, being a federal agent meant making choices that would haunt you regardless of their outcome. Sofia Martinez had built her career on competence, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to justice. But as she sat in the safe house overlooking the port of Veracruz, she realized that sometimes justice required compromise, and competence meant knowing when to break the rules that everyone else followed without question. Tomorrow, she would call Carlos Mendoza and accept his offer of cooperation. Judge Elena Vasquez would live, government corruption would be exposed, and Sofia's career would never be quite the same. But some victories were worth the price of certainty, and some choices had to be made by agents who looked too young to understand their consequences, but were wise enough to make them anyway. The warehouse in Doctores district looked abandoned from the outside, its corrugated metal walls covered in graffiti and rust stains. But Sofia Martinez knew better. Her surveillance had revealed this building as the staging area for the mercenary team planning to assassinate Judge Elena Vasquez in 8 hours. She crouched on the adjacent rooftop, studying the heat signatures through her thermal scope as armed figures moved through the structure below. Carlos Mendoza had kept his word. The intelligence he provided had led her directly to the conspirators, and now she faced the most critical operation of her career. But she wasn't conducting it through official channels. Her teammates believed she was following up on a minor lead while they prepared for the weapons smuggling arrests at the port. Only she knew the real stakes of what was about to unfold. Sofia keyed the secure phone Mendoza had given her. His voice answered on the first ring. "Agent Martinez. I trust you have found our mercenary friends?" "Confirmed. 6 hostiles in the building, heavy weapons, tactical gear. They're preparing to move out within the hour." "Excellent. The building has only 2 exits. If you seal the rear entrance, they will be forced to funnel through the front-loading dock where you can engage them on favorable terms." Sofia felt a chill at how easily Mendoza discussed tactical scenarios. He spoke like someone with extensive military experience, which made him far more dangerous than Miguel Varga had ever been. What about the government officials who hired them? Deputy Minister Eduardo Solis will be meeting with the team leader in 20 minutes to provide final payment and confirm target details. If you time your approach correctly, you can capture both the mercenaries and their government handler. Sofia checked her watch. Judge Vasquez would be leaving for the courthouse in 3 hours, walking into what she believed was another routine day of cartel prosecutions. The mercenaries planned to detonate explosives in the parking garage before opening fire on anyone who survived the initial blast. "Mendoza, after this is over, we're done. No more contact, no more cooperation. Of course, Agent Martinez. This arrangement serves both our interests, but I have no desire to complicate your career further." Sofia ended the call and began her descent from the rooftop. She had called in a favor with Agent Rodriguez, asking him to position himself 3 blocks away with backup support, but without explaining the full situation. If things went wrong, she would need immediate assistance, but she couldn't risk exposing the source of her intelligence. The warehouse district was eerily quiet at this early morning hour. Sofia moved through the shadows between buildings, her service weapon drawn and her radio set to emergency frequency. She had studied the building layout using satellite imagery and identified the optimal approach routes. As she reached the rear entrance, Sofia could hear voices speaking in English with American accents. These weren't Mexican mercenaries or cartel gunmen. They were professional soldiers, probably former military or private security contractors. That explained their sophisticated equipment and operational discipline. Sofia positioned herself beside the rear door and listened to the conversation inside. She could distinguish at least 4 different voices discussing timing, target acquisition, and escape routes. One man was reviewing the courthouse floor plans, while another checked explosive charges. A 5th voice joined the conversation, speaking Spanish with the refined accent of Mexico's political elite. Deputy Minister Solis had arrived for the final briefing. The judge typically enters through the east entrance at 9:15, Solis was saying. Her security detail consists of 2 bodyguards who can be neutralized before they pose a threat. "What about witness elimination?" asked an American voice. "Leave no one alive who can testify about the attack." It must appear to be the work of the Sinaloa cartel seeking revenge for recent prosecutions. Sofia felt her jaw clench with anger. These men were planning to massacre innocent courthouse employees and frame rival criminal organizations for their crime. The corruption went deeper than she had imagined. She activated her radio with a whispered transmission. "Rodriguez, I need immediate backup at Warehouse 77 Alpha in Doctores. Armed hostiles, federal priority." Rodriguez's response came back urgent and confused. "Martinez, what the hell are you doing? You were supposed to be conducting preliminary surveillance." "No time to explain. Multiple armed suspects, government conspiracy, lives at stake. I'm going in." Before Rodriguez could protest, Sofia switched off her radio and moved to the rear entrance. She had learned from her experience with Miguel Varga that hesitation could be fatal. Sometimes federal agents had to act on incomplete information and trust their training to see them through. Sofia tested the rear door and found it unlocked. She could hear the conspirators moving toward the front of the building, apparently preparing to leave for their final positions around the courthouse. In minutes, they would scatter across the city and become much harder to apprehend. She slipped through the door and found herself in a storage area filled with military equipment. Assault rifles, body armor, explosive devices, and communication gear were arranged on tables like the inventory of a small army. Whatever organization had hired these mercenaries had provided them with unlimited resources. Sofia moved through the storage area toward the voices at the front of the building. She could see the conspirators gathered around a table covered with maps and photographs. Deputy Minister Solis stood beside the team leader, a tall man with graying hair who wore tactical clothing despite his expensive watch and manicured appearance. "Federal agents, you're all under arrest." Sofia stepped into the main room with her weapon raised, immediately scanning for threats and cover positions. The 6 men spun toward her voice, their hands moving toward weapons with practiced efficiency. "Drop your weapons and get on the ground!" Now, the team leader, whom Sofia now recognized from the intelligence photos as former Delta Force operator Marcus Webb, smiled coldly at her appearance. "Well, well, Agent Sofia Martinez, the famous baby-faced cop killer. I was wondering when you'd show up." Sofia kept her weapon trained on Webb while tracking the other conspirators with her peripheral vision. They were spreading out, trying to establish crossfire positions that would give them tactical advantage. "You know who I am? Sweetheart, everyone in this business knows who you are. The little girl who got lucky with Miguel Varga. But Varga was a psychopath who made stupid mistakes. We're professionals." Deputy Minister Solis had gone pale and was backing toward what appeared to be a side exit. Sofia couldn't let him escape, but she also couldn't take her primary focus off the armed mercenaries. "Minister Solis, stop right there. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." Solis froze, his face a mask of terror and disbelief. "Agent Martinez, you don't understand the complexities of this situation. Judge Vasquez has been compromised by cartel influences. Her elimination serves the greater good. The only thing I understand is that you hired killers to murder a federal judge and frame innocent people for the crime." Webb laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "Agent Martinez, you've stumbled into something much bigger than your little DEA brain can comprehend. This operation has been authorized at the highest levels of both governments. Then you won't mind explaining it to federal prosecutors. I don't think we'll be doing that." Webb's hand moved toward his sidearm with lightning speed, but Sofia was already in motion. Her first shot caught him center mass before his weapon cleared its holster. Her second shot dropped the mercenary to her left, who had been reaching for an assault rifle. The warehouse erupted in chaos as the remaining conspirators scrambled for weapons and cover. Sofia dove behind a concrete pillar as automatic weapons fire began chewing chunks out of the walls around her position. "Rodriguez, where's my backup?" she shouted into her radio. "2 minutes out! Keep your head down!" Sofia counted muzzle flashes and tried to track the positions of the remaining hostiles. At least 3 mercenaries were still active. Plus, Deputy Minister Solis, who had drawn a small pistol and was firing wildly in her direction. She rolled from behind the pillar and put 2 rounds into the nearest mercenary before diving behind a stack of equipment crates. Return fire shattered the concrete where she had been standing seconds earlier. "You're outnumbered, Martinez," one of the Americans shouted. "Surrender now, and we might let you live." Sofia smiled grimly and checked her ammunition. She had learned something important during her confrontation with Miguel Varga. When people underestimated her because of her appearance, they made tactical errors that could be exploited. She pulled a flashbang grenade from her tactical vest and counted to 3 before throwing it toward the center of the room. The explosion filled the warehouse with blinding light and deafening noise, temporarily disorienting everyone inside. Sofia used the confusion to advance on the mercenaries' positions, moving with the fluid precision that had made her one of the DEA's most effective agents. Her training had taught her to think and react faster than opponents who relied solely on superior firepower. She eliminated the 3rd mercenary as he stumbled blindly from behind an overturned table. The 4th went down as he tried to reload his weapon with hands that were still shaking from the flashbang's effects. Deputy Minister Solis was the last hostile remaining, cowering behind a desk with his small pistol held in trembling hands. Sofia approached him carefully, her weapon trained on his position. "Drop the gun, Minister. It's over." Solis looked up at her with eyes filled with desperation and fear. "Agent Martinez, you don't realize what you've done. This operation was necessary to preserve stability in Mexico. Judge Vasquez was going to release dangerous criminals back onto the streets. Judge Vasquez was doing her job, just like I'm doing mine." Sofia zip-tied Solis's hands behind his back just as the warehouse doors burst open, and Agent Rodriguez led a team of heavily armed federal agents into the building. They stopped short when they saw the carnage around Sofia's position. "Jesus Christ, Martinez, what happened here?" Sofia holstered her weapon and gestured toward the evidence tables. "Government conspiracy to assassinate Judge Elena Vasquez. The minister over there hired American mercenaries to kill her and frame cartel organizations for the murder." Rodriguez walked through the warehouse, examining the weapons and documents scattered across the floor. "How did you know about this?" Sofia had been dreading that question. She couldn't reveal her source without exposing her cooperation with Carlos Mendoza, but she also couldn't lie to a fellow federal agent. "I developed intelligence suggesting that Judge Vasquez was being targeted. When I investigated further, it led me here." Rodriguez studied her face carefully, obviously sensing that she wasn't telling him the complete truth. But he also recognized that she had just prevented a major terrorist attack against the Mexican federal court system. "We'll need a full debrief on your intelligence sources." "Of course, but right now we should focus on securing the evidence and making sure Judge Vasquez is protected." 3 hours later, Sofia sat in a Mexico City hospital, getting stitches for a graze wound on her left arm. She had been lucky. The mercenaries' automatic weapons could have easily killed her if she had made even minor tactical errors. Agent Morrison arrived at the hospital with an expression that mixed relief, admiration, and exhaustion. "Martinez, I've been a federal agent for 25 years, and I've never seen anything like what you accomplished today. You single-handedly prevented an assassination and exposed government corruption at the highest levels. I was just doing my job, sir." Morrison sat down in the chair beside her hospital bed. "No, you weren't. Your job was to conduct surveillance on a weapons smuggling operation. What you did today went far beyond any reasonable definition of your duties." Sofia met his gaze directly. "Sir, if I had followed protocol and reported my suspicions through normal channels, Judge Vasquez would be dead right now. Sometimes federal agents have to make decisions based on incomplete information. And sometimes those decisions get agents killed. You're lucky you walked out of that warehouse alive. Sofia thought about Carlos Mendoza's intelligence, about the impossible choice she had made to work with a cartel leader in order to save innocent lives. Morrison was right that she had been lucky, but luck alone hadn't been enough. "Sir, what happens now?" Morrison smiled for the first time since entering the hospital room. "Now you get a commendation for exceptional bravery and probably another promotion offer from Washington." Deputy Minister Solis is singing like a canary about government officials who were involved in the conspiracy. This case is going to make careers for everyone involved. And the weapons smuggling operation? We rolled up the entire network this morning while you were busy playing superhero. 47 arrests, enough weapons to supply a battalion, and financial records that implicate cartel leaders across 3 countries. Sofia nodded, feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with career advancement or personal recognition. Judge Elena Vasquez would go home to her children tonight. Corrupt government officials would face justice, and Mexico would be marginally safer because one young agent had been willing to make difficult choices. "Martinez, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sir." Morrison leaned forward in his chair, his expression serious. "How did you really develop intelligence about the assassination plot?" "Because I've reviewed your surveillance reports, and there's nothing in them that would have led to that warehouse." Sofia had been expecting this question and had spent hours considering her response. She couldn't reveal her cooperation with Mendoza, but she also respected Morrison too much to lie outright. "Sir, sometimes field agents develop sources and information through informal channels. I can't always document the complete chain of intelligence gathering without compromising ongoing operations." Morrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand. But Martinez, be careful about informal channels. They can be useful, but they can also be dangerous in ways you might not anticipate." "I understand, sir." After Morrison left, Sofia sat alone in the hospital room and thought about the path that had brought her from an underestimated rookie agent to someone capable of taking down government conspiracies and international assassination plots. She had proven herself repeatedly, but the price of that proof had been higher than she had anticipated. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Sofia opened it to find a simple message. "Thank you for your professionalism, Agent Martinez. Our business is concluded." Sofia deleted the message and turned off her phone. Carlos Mendoza had kept his word, and she had kept hers. Judge Vasquez was safe. The conspirators were in custody, and the corrupt officials would face justice. But Sofia knew that her cooperation with a cartel leader would haunt her for the rest of her career. She had saved innocent lives by compromising her principles, and she would never be entirely certain whether she had made the right choice. Sometimes being a federal agent meant living with ambiguity, making decisions that couldn't be fully explained or justified, and accepting that justice was messier than the law enforcement manual suggested. Sofia Martinez had built her career on competence and integrity, but she had learned that sometimes integrity meant breaking rules in service of a higher purpose. She was no longer the young agent, with a baby face who looked too innocent for dangerous work. She was someone who understood that the most important victories were often achieved in shadows, by agents who were willing to carry burdens that others couldn't imagine. The little girl with the baby face had become something far more dangerous than anyone had expected. She had become someone who could make the impossible choices that kept innocent people alive. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.